Hey guys, tonight we're exploring a story that everyone in history should know. The story is, everyone once learned these forgotten skills. You get comfortable. Take a moment, like the video, and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Everyone once learned these forgotten skills. Long ago, before glowing screens, before engines carried people across great distances, and before machines quietly completed countless tasks in the background, every ordinary person spent years learning skills that today are almost forgotten. They were not unusual talents reserved for masters or scholars. They were simply part of everyday life. A child growing up in a village, a town, or even within the walls of a busy city slowly gathered these abilities through watching, listening, and practicing. No certificates marked the moment they became capable. Their hands simply remembered what their eyes had seen many times before. Imagine settling into a quiet evening many centuries ago. The air is cool, carrying the gentle scent of damp earth after a light rain. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks once before curling beside a doorway. Smoke rises lazily from cooking fires, drifting into the fading blue sky. The village grows quieter with every passing moment. There are no electric lights, no distant hum of traffic, only the peaceful sounds of wooden doors closing and quiet conversations fading into the night. You find yourself among people whose daily routines depend almost entirely on what they know how to do. Knowledge is not hidden inside books for most families. Instead, it lives in memory. It moves from grandparents to parents, from parents to children, through patient repetition over many seasons. Many of these forgotten skills were so ordinary that no one imagined they might disappear one day. One of the first lessons every child quietly absorbed was how to notice the weather. Today, many of us glance at a forecast on a phone before stepping outside. Yet for thousands of years, people became careful observers of the sky itself. They watched the movement of clouds, the direction of smoke rising from chimneys, the behavior of birds, and even the smell carried by the wind. These observations were not magical predictions. They were careful habits built from long experience. A shepherd spending every day outdoors noticed how certain clouds often arrived before rain. Farmers remembered how damp evening air sometimes meant heavy morning fog. Sailors paid close attention to changing winds because their safety depended upon them. Picture yourself standing beside a quiet field just before sunrise. Dew rests upon every blade of grass. The eastern horizon slowly brightens. An older farmer pauses before beginning work. He looks upward for several moments, saying almost nothing. His children watch him carefully, not because he is performing a ceremony, but because they know he is reading the sky. This quiet lesson repeats hundreds of mornings throughout childhood. Little by little, the children begin noticing the same patterns without anyone formally teaching them. Learning happened through daily life. The same gentle process shaped another forgotten skill that once belonged to nearly everyone. People knew how to repair the things they owned. Clothing rarely lasted forever. Shoes slowly wore thin. Wooden buckets developed cracks. Pots lost their handles. Rope frayed after months of use. Instead of throwing these items away, families repaired them again and again. Needles became valuable tools, not because sewing was considered an art, but because sewing was necessary. Even young children learned how to mend small tears in cloth. Imagine sitting inside a simple home during a cold evening. Firelight flickers across rough wooden walls. Outside, winter wind brushes softly against the roof. Around the fire, every pair of hands remains busy. Someone twists fresh cord from plant fibers. Another sharpens a knife against smooth stone. An older woman quietly stitches worn sleeves while speaking gently about events from many years earlier. A young child watches every careful movement. No classroom exists. Yet an education is unfolding before everyone's eyes. The rhythm of work becomes the rhythm of learning. As the morning slowly arrives after another peaceful night, those repaired clothes return to daily use. Nothing has been wasted. Modern historians often remind us that cloth represented many hours of labor before industrial factories transformed textile production. Spinning fibers, weaving fabric, cutting garments, and sewing every seam demanded patience. Because of this effort, clothing carried tremendous value. Repairing was simply common sense. Few people expected perfection. Instead, they admired usefulness. A patched sleeve spoke quietly of careful hands rather than embarrassment. The same practical thinking appeared inside kitchens across countless civilizations. Everyone understood how to preserve food. Fresh harvests did not last forever. Families dried herbs beneath shaded roofs. Fish hung where cool breezes could remove moisture. Fruit slowly transformed beneath the warmth of gentle sunlight. Salt protected meat during long winters. Fermentation quietly changed milk into cheese, vegetables into preserved foods, and grains into nourishing drinks. These techniques developed across many cultures independently because people everywhere faced the same challenge. Food had to survive changing seasons. Picture yourself entering a farmhouse near the end of summer. Warm air carries the scent of apples, fresh hay, and drying herbs. Bundles of onions hang neatly overhead. Clay jars stand patiently against cool walls. Children help without complaint because they understand these tasks mean comfort when snow finally arrives months later. Every generation adds small improvements. Perhaps one family discovers a cooler storage place beneath the earth. Another learns that certain herbs discourage insects. Knowledge grows slowly, like the rings inside an ancient tree. No single inventor transforms everything overnight. Instead, thousands of quiet observations accumulate across centuries. Another forgotten skill seems surprisingly simple today. People could usually find their way without maps. Road signs remained rare outside important routes. Travelers relied upon memory, landmarks, rivers, hills, stars, and the position of the sun. Imagine beginning a journey before dawn. Mist floats above nearby streams. Your companions speak softly while preparing supplies. No one unfolds a printed map. Instead, an older traveler points toward distant hills, barely visible in early light. He remembers where two rivers meet. He recalls the shape of unusual trees. He recognizes the sound of water hidden behind thick forest. the land itself becomes a guide. Even within crowded medieval towns, people memorized twisting streets through repeated experience. Merchants remembered where skilled blacksmiths worked. Children knew which alleys flooded after rain. Visitors depended upon local knowledge shared generously through conversation. Memory served as the most reliable navigation tool. Listening carefully was another forgotten ability almost everyone practiced. Without constant background noise from machines, televisions, or electronic devices, quieter sounds became easier to notice. People recognized approaching horses long before they appeared. Mill workers identified problems simply by hearing unusual rhythms inside wooden machinery. Farmers listened for changes in livestock behavior. Fishermen noticed subtle differences in waves reaching the shore. Imagine sitting beside a calm river during evening. The current flows gently around smooth stones. Birds gradually settle into nearby trees. Far away, you hear the faint creaking of a wooden cart crossing a bridge. An older fisherman smiles quietly. Without turning around, he already knows which neighbor is returning home. Years of listening have taught him the unique rhythm of every cart along the village road. Such awareness rarely required extraordinary hearing. It required attention. Attention itself was one of humanity's greatest everyday skills. As night slowly deepens, stars begin appearing one by one above quiet rooftops. Families gather inside warm homes. Children grow sleepy, while older voices continue sharing stories. Many tales entertain. Others quietly preserve knowledge. Hidden inside familiar stories are reminders about planting seasons, dangerous rivers, trustworthy roads, unusual animals, changing weather, and family history. Storytelling becomes another classroom without walls. No written examination follows. Life itself becomes the examination. If a young traveler remembers the safe crossing described by an elder years before, the lesson has succeeded. If a family preserves enough grain through winter because they remembered old advice, knowledge has quietly fulfilled its purpose. Picture yourself closing your eyes beside that warm fire. The flames crackle softly. Outside, wind moves gently through tall grass. Inside, generations sit together beneath one roof. Their conversations wander naturally between memories, practical advice, gentle humor, and hopes for tomorrow. No one realizes that centuries later, many of these ordinary abilities will become unusual. No one imagines that people will someday purchase tools they once made themselves, replace objects they once repaired, or depend upon devices to remember directions once carried comfortably inside the mind. Yet none of this knowledge truly disappears. It simply waits patiently beneath the surface of history, like old pathways hidden beneath forests that have quietly grown over them. And as the quiet evening slowly gives way to another peaceful dawn, our gentle journey into these forgotten skills has only just begun. The first light of morning spreads gently across the horizon, touching fields that have waited quietly through the cool hours of the night. Birds begin their familiar songs one by one, not all at once, but gradually, as though the landscape itself is waking with calm patience. A faint mist lingers over the grass, and tiny drops of dew reflect the growing light like countless small mirrors. Imagine standing at the edge of a village, before most people have spoken their first words of the day. There is no rush. The rhythm of life follows the rising sun instead of a clock hanging upon a wall. A baker has already been awake for hours. Soft smoke rises from the oven as bread slowly fills the air with its warm, comforting scent. Nearby, someone opens a wooden gate with a gentle creak, allowing a few chickens to wander into the yard. A shepherd quietly gathers his flock, while children still wrapped in blankets slowly open their eyes to another ordinary morning. For thousands of years, mornings like this were almost universal. Every day offered another chance to practice skills that today seem surprisingly unfamiliar. One of the most valuable was learning how to use every part of a natural resource. Nothing was considered worthless simply because its purpose was not immediately obvious. Wood provides a wonderful example. Today we often think of wood as lumber, prepared inside factories. Yet for most of history, people understood trees in remarkable detail. Different woods served different purposes. Oak offered strength for buildings and wagons. Ash bent well without breaking, making it useful for tool handles. Willow remained flexible enough for weaving baskets. Pine burned quickly and was often chosen for kindling, while slower-burning hardwoods warmed homes through long winter evenings. Picture yourself walking beside an experienced carpenter through a quiet woodland. He rarely hurries. Every tree receives careful attention. He notices the direction of growth, the shape of the trunk, and even how the branches reach toward sunlight. A younger apprentice walks beside him, saying very little. The lesson comes through observation. Occasionally, the older craftsperson places a hand against rough bark. "This one," he quietly says, "will make a strong beam one day." Another tree is left untouched. It still has years of growing ahead. Sustainable use was often born from necessity rather than written environmental policies. Communities depended upon forests lasting for future generations. Many medieval towns and villages developed local customs that limited unnecessary cutting, because everyone understood the consequences of exhausting nearby woodland. The forest was more than scenery. It provided warmth, shelter, tools, medicines, food, and protection. People respected what they depended upon. Another forgotten skill began with something almost every modern person still touches every day: rope. Today, rope arrives neatly wound inside shops. Few people pause to wonder how it was made. Yet twisting strong fibers into reliable cord was once an ordinary ability known across much of the world. Plant fibers, animal hair, strips of bark, and other natural materials could all become useful cordage. The process demanded patience more than strength. Imagine sitting outside beneath the shade of a broad tree on a peaceful afternoon. An elderly woman slowly rolls plant fibers between her hands. Her movements appear almost effortless. Beside her, two children attempt the same task. Their first attempts quickly come apart. The fibers loosen. The cord twists unevenly. They smile quietly at their own mistakes. Without criticism, the older woman simply demonstrates again. Little by little, their hands discover the proper rhythm. By evening, they have produced only a short length of rope. Yet tomorrow they will make more. A year later, they will scarcely remember struggling at all. Many ancient and medieval societies relied heavily upon ropes, fishing nets, wells, sailing ships, farming tools, bridges, and simple household tasks all depended upon strong cord. It was such an ordinary object that few historical records bothered describing how common people learned to make it. Everyone simply expected that they would. The quiet confidence that comes from repeated practice shaped countless forgotten skills. Children were rarely expected to master everything immediately. Instead, they grew into knowledge naturally. Another skill almost everyone developed was recognizing healthy soil. Modern agriculture often depends upon scientific testing and carefully measured nutrients. Historical farmers had no laboratories. Instead, they trusted long observation. Picture yourself kneeling beside a field shortly after gentle rain. You scoop a handful of dark earth into your palm. It feels cool. It breaks apart slowly between your fingers. An experienced farmer smiles with quiet satisfaction. Healthy soil has its own appearance, texture, and even scent. Generations learned these details through constant familiarity. They noticed which fields remained productive. They remembered where water collected after storms. They observed how different crops responded to changing seasons. Their knowledge grew through careful experience rather than written formulas. Many farming traditions that seem simple today actually represent centuries of patient observation. Crop rotation, allowing fields to rest, adding animal manure, and protecting valuable topsoils gradually improved harvests across many regions. Not every community used identical methods. Climate, geography, and local resources shaped different solutions. Yet the habit remained the same. People watched nature closely. Nature quietly became their teacher. As the sun climbs higher, gentle warmth spreads across the countryside. The sounds of work slowly replace the silence of dawn. Axes strike wood with steady rhythm. Water splashes into buckets. Children laugh while carrying smaller bundles that match their growing strength. No task feels separated from learning. Daily life itself is education. Among these lessons was an ability that modern people sometimes overlook: knowing when not to work. Imagine the hottest hour of a summer afternoon. Even insects seem quiet beneath the heavy warmth. Across southern Europe, parts of the Middle East, North Africa, and many other warm regions, people often understood that constant labor under intense heat was unwise. Whenever possible, demanding tasks shifted toward cooler morning or evening hours. This was not laziness. It was practical wisdom, developed through experience. Human bodies have always responded to heat in similar ways. Communities adapted accordingly. Listening to the seasons also meant listening to one's own limits. Another forgotten skill involved reading the passage of time without mechanical clocks. For much of history, ordinary people measured time differently. Picture yourself standing beside a field. The shadow of a tall tree stretches slowly across the ground. An elderly farmer glances only briefly before returning to work. He knows approximately how much daylight remains. Church bells, the position of the sun, familiar daily routines, birds returning toward nests, and changing light all helped people estimate time remarkably well. Exact minutes mattered less than natural rhythms. Morning, midday, late afternoon, twilight. These gentle divisions shaped countless lives. Even after mechanical clocks became more common in towns, many rural communities continued relying upon nature's dependable signals. The sky remained the oldest clock humanity had ever known. As afternoon slowly fades, another valuable lesson begins. Children accompany older relatives gathering wild plants. This knowledge demanded great care. Some plants nourished, others healed. A few could be dangerous if misunderstood. Imagine walking quietly through an open meadow. Soft wind carries the scent of grasses warmed by sunlight. An older woman kneels beside a patch of herbs. She points toward one leaf, then another. She explains which may soothe an upset stomach, which one flavors soup, which should never be eaten. Her voice remains calm. She never encourages guessing. Instead, she repeats the importance of certainty. Throughout history, many communities preserved remarkable knowledge about local plants. Some traditions proved highly effective. Others reflected beliefs that modern science later corrected. Careful historical study reminds us that traditional knowledge contained both practical wisdom and understandable misunderstandings. Experience remained valuable, yet observation continued evolving across generations. People learned, adjusted, and shared what seemed to work best. As evening approaches once again, cooler air drifts gently across the fields. Workers gradually return home, carrying tools polished smooth through years of use. A blacksmith wipes soot from weathered hands before closing the workshop. The steady ringing of hammer against iron slowly fades into memory. Nearby, someone draws fresh water from a village well. Children chase one another for a few final moments before supper. The smell of simmering vegetables, fresh bread, and herbs quietly fills the narrow lanes. You find yourself walking slowly through this peaceful place. Nothing feels hurried. Every ordinary object tells a quiet story. The basket hanging beside a doorway reflects hours of careful weaving. The wooden spoon resting near a cooking pot remembers the hands that carved it. The repaired shoes beside the entrance reveal patient stitching completed during winter evenings. Almost everything surrounding you has passed through human hands more than once. People knew how things were made because they had often helped make them. Ownership carried understanding. Perhaps that is one of history's gentlest lessons. When people participate in creating something, they often care for it differently. They notice small changes. They repair tiny problems before they become larger ones. They appreciate the time hidden inside simple objects. The stars begin appearing once more above the quiet village. Their familiar patterns slowly brighten as darkness settles over rooftops and fields alike. Families gather around warm fires, sharing food, stories, and the peaceful comfort of another day completed. Outside, the wind moves softly through nearby trees, just as it has for countless generations. Tomorrow will bring new work, new lessons, new quiet moments of observation. And with another sunrise, we will continue exploring the forgotten skills that once belonged to nearly everyone, waiting patiently beneath the surface of history for curious minds to discover them once again. Night settles gently over the countryside, wrapping fields and quiet homes beneath a sky filled with countless stars. The warmth of the evening fire slowly begins to fade, replaced by the cool breath of the open air. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls once before silence returns. The village sleeps peacefully, while the natural world continues its quiet rhythm without pause. Imagine lying beneath a simple wool blanket, listening to the soft sounds of wooden beams settling inside the house. There are no distant engines, no bright lights spilling across the landscape, only the occasional whisper of wind slipping through the trees. For most people throughout history, nights like this were deeply familiar. Rest was valuable because another day of careful work would soon begin. As the morning slowly arrives, a pale ribbon of light stretches across the eastern horizon. Roosters greet the dawn, and smoke begins rising from chimneys one after another. Doors open quietly, and another ordinary day begins, much like the countless days that came before it. Today, our journey leads us to another forgotten skill that nearly everyone once possessed. It was the ability to sharpen tools. Modern people often replace dull blades without giving the matter much thought. A kitchen knife that no longer cuts well may simply be exchanged for a newer one. Garden tools are often replaced after years of use. Yet for thousands of years, replacing tools was rarely an easy option. A dull blade represented lost time. A sharp blade represented careful attention. Picture yourself standing beside an elderly craftsperson outside a small workshop. The morning air still feels cool, and tiny drops of dew cling to nearby grass. Before beginning any work, the craftsperson sits quietly beside a smooth, sharpening stone. He pours a little water across its surface. The stone darkens. Then, with slow and steady movements, the blade slides across it again and again. There is no hurry, only rhythm. The soft scraping sound becomes almost peaceful, blending with birdsong and the distant murmur of waking animals. A young apprentice watches every movement. At first, sharpening appears simple, but soon the apprentice discovers that holding the blade at the wrong angle removes too much metal. Pressing too hard leaves uneven edges. Moving too quickly produces poor results. Like many forgotten skills, sharpening demands patience more than strength. The lesson cannot be rushed. Throughout history, farmers sharpened sickles before harvest. Woodworkers cared for chisels and planes. Hunters maintained knives used for preparing food. Blacksmiths understood that creating a tool was only the beginning. Keeping it useful required lifelong attention. Small acts of maintenance quietly saved countless hours of labor. In many ways, history often rewards those who cared for ordinary things. Another skill, now rarely considered, involved understanding silence itself. Imagine walking with an experienced hunter through an ancient woodland. Leaves cover the ground beneath your feet. Sunlight filters softly through branches overhead. The hunter says almost nothing. His attention remains focused upon tiny details. A broken twig. Fresh footprints pressed into damp soil. The direction in which birds suddenly fly. None of these signs guarantee success, yet together they tell a quiet story. People who spent much of their lives outdoors learned to notice what others easily overlooked. This ability served hunters, shepherds, travelers, and even children gathering firewood. Silence allowed the landscape to speak. You find yourself slowing your own footsteps. Soon you begin hearing sounds that seemed invisible before. A woodpecker tapping somewhere beyond the trees. The gentle movement of leaves stirred by a passing breeze. Water flowing over hidden stones. Nature becomes richer as attention deepens. Many forgotten skills were not really about doing more. They were about noticing more. As the sun rises higher, village life gradually becomes busier. A cooper shapes wooden staves for a barrel. Nearby, a potter turns damp clay with patient hands. Each craft appears different, yet they all share one quiet truth. They rely upon measuring without modern instruments. Today, we often trust rulers marked with exact numbers or digital devices capable of remarkable precision. Historical craftspeople certainly used measuring tools whenever available, but they also developed an extraordinary sense of proportion. Picture yourself inside a carpenter's workshop. Fresh wood fills the room with a clean, comforting scent. The carpenter lifts a beam and compares it against another with practiced eyes. He checks the width of his hand. He measures using the length of his forearm. He confirms the fit by placing one carefully shaped piece against another. Many traditional units of measurement originally came from the human body. Hands, feet, cubits, finger widths. These measurements varied somewhat from person to person, which is why more standardized systems gradually developed over time. Yet for countless everyday tasks, skilled workers achieved remarkable accuracy simply through long experience. Their eyes had learned what balance looked like. Their hands remembered what felt correct. Another forgotten ability was recognizing quality by touch. Imagine entering a marketplace filled with woven baskets, wool cloth, leather goods, pottery, and fresh produce. The air carries the mixed scents of bread, herbs, animals, and wood smoke. Merchants greet familiar customers warmly. People examine goods carefully. A woman gently rubs a piece of woven cloth between her fingers. Without speaking, she judges its thickness. Nearby, a farmer lifts a sack of grain, feeling its weight before agreeing to a trade. A cooper taps a finished barrel, listening to the sound produced by its wooden sides. These small habits developed through repeated experience. People trusted their senses because they used them constantly. Touch revealed information. Sound revealed information. Smell revealed information. Observation guided countless daily decisions. As afternoon approaches, children gather beside older relatives learning another skill that once seemed perfectly ordinary. They are learning to knot rope. At first glance, a knot may appear unimportant, yet history tells a different story. Sailors crossed oceans using carefully chosen knots. Farmers secured heavy loads. Builders lifted stones. Travelers fastened supplies. Fishermen trusted knots that could withstand powerful currents. Every knot solved a different problem. Imagine an old sailor sitting beneath the shade of a tree near a quiet harbor. His weathered hands move almost without thought. A simple loop becomes something stronger. Then another twist transforms it again. Young listeners watch closely. Some laugh when their first attempts come loose. The sailor smiles gently. He unties the rope and begins again. No frustration, only repetition. Knowledge passes quietly from one pair of hands to another. Centuries later, Many of these same knots remain in use because they continue to solve practical problems remarkably well. History sometimes changes quickly. At other times, it moves with surprising patience. The afternoon sun slowly begins its gentle journey downward. Shadows stretch farther across fields. A cool breeze returns, bringing welcome relief after the warmth of midday. Women carrying baskets exchange quiet conversations as they return from nearby gardens. Children collect eggs from wooden coops with careful hands. An elderly man pauses beside a stone wall, replacing one loose rock before continuing home. Nobody has asked him to do so. He simply understands that small repairs prevent larger ones. This quiet habit once shaped entire communities. People often cared for shared spaces because everyone depended upon them. Roads remained passable through collective effort. Bridges lasted longer because neighbors maintained them. Village wells stayed clean because each family recognized their importance. Responsibility was rarely invisible. It lived within everyday routines. As evening slowly arrives once more, cooking fires brighten the fading light. The comforting aroma of simmering soup drifts gently through narrow paths between homes. Someone slices fresh bread. Another stirs a pot. Using a spoon carved many years earlier, the familiar sounds of family life return with the setting sun. You find yourself sitting beside the fire again, listening to older voices, sharing quiet memories. They do not speak only about great kings or famous battles. Instead, they remember difficult winters survived through careful planning, harvests made possible by patient neighbors, journeys completed because someone knew the safest road, tools repaired instead of replaced, seeds saved instead of wasted. History often remembers remarkable individuals, yet most of humanity quietly shaped the world through ordinary wisdom practiced day after day. Perhaps that is why these forgotten skills still feel strangely comforting. They remind us that human life has always depended upon patience, observation, kindness, and the willingness to learn from those who came before. Outside, the stars slowly return to the night sky, appearing one by one above the peaceful village. The wind brushes gently through the trees, carrying with it the familiar scent of earth and distant fields. Another quiet day has come to its natural end. And as sleep gently settles over the homes below, our journey through history continues onward, following the quiet footsteps of ordinary people whose forgotten knowledge still echoes softly across the centuries. The night passes with quiet patience, just as it has for countless generations. Above the sleeping countryside, the stars slowly wheel across the dark sky, following paths that people have watched for thousands of years. Somewhere beyond the fields, a gentle stream continues its endless journey, its soft murmur never truly stopping. Even while villages rest, nature quietly continues its work. As the morning slowly arrives, a silver mist settles over the meadows. The first rays of sunlight touch the tops of distant trees before reaching the cottages below. Birds greet the day in gentle voices, while the cool air carries the pleasant scent of damp grass, fresh earth, and wood smoke drifting from the earliest kitchen fires. Imagine stepping outside into this peaceful world. The ground feels cool beneath your feet. Tiny drops of dew sparkle on every blade of grass, disappearing one by one as the sun climbs higher. The village awakens slowly, without hurry. A woman sweeps the front of her home with a handmade broom. An elderly man opens the wooden gate that keeps his small flock safely enclosed during the night. Somewhere nearby, the rhythmic knocking of a carpenter already echoes softly through the still morning. Life begins again, and with every new day comes another quiet lesson. One forgotten skill nearly everyone once learned was how to carry water. Today, water appears almost effortlessly. A simple turn of a tap brings clean water into homes within moments. Yet for most of human history, every bucket of water represented careful effort. Picture yourself walking beside a narrow path leading toward the village well. The morning sun is still low. Several neighbors have already gathered there, greeting one another with quiet smiles. Some carry wooden buckets. Others balance clay jars. Children accompany their parents, learning not only how to lift the containers, but also how to walk without spilling precious water. At first glance, carrying water seems simple, but full buckets quickly become heavy. An uneven step wastes valuable effort. Over time, people naturally discovered ways to balance weight across their shoulders or carry two containers together. Their movements became smooth and efficient through years of daily practice. Water was needed for cooking, for drinking, for washing, for caring for animals, for making bread, for countless ordinary tasks that quietly filled every day. The journey to the well was repeated so often that it became woven into the rhythm of life itself. Along those paths, conversations flourished, news traveled, friendships grew. Children listened carefully while adults exchanged stories about weather, harvests, marriages, visitors, and distant relatives. Sometimes knowledge moved through a community one quiet conversation at a time. Another forgotten skill was understanding the value of clean water. Although people did not know about microscopic organisms in the way modern science explains them today, many communities learned through experience that some water sources were safer than others. Natural springs were often highly valued. Flowing water was frequently preferred over stagnant pools. Wells required careful maintenance. Communities developed customs to protect important water supplies because they understood, even without modern biology, that polluted water often led to illness. Experience became their teacher. Generation after generation quietly remembered which places offered the safest drinking water. As the sun rises higher, the village grows busier. Farm animals begin their daily routines. A pair of oxen slowly pulls a wooden cart across the road. Nearby, a young boy carefully brushes a horse before beginning the day's work. Learning to care for animals was another forgotten skill, shared by millions of ordinary people. Imagine standing inside a modest stable. Warm sunlight filters through narrow openings in the wooden walls. The sweet scent of hay fills the air. A horse lowers its head while patiently eating breakfast. An older stable keeper gently runs a hand along the animal's neck, checking for cuts, swelling, or signs of discomfort. The lesson is simple. Healthy animals require daily attention. Small problems noticed early are easier to solve. Children learn to recognize changes in behavior long before they understood the reasons behind them. A sheep that stopped eating, a cow that walked differently, a horse that seemed unusually restless. These observations often mattered greatly. Animals were companions in work, as well as valuable members of the household economy. Their well-being affected entire families. Across history, different cultures relied upon different animals. Camels carried travelers across deserts. Yaks climbed mountain paths. Water buffalo worked in flooded rice fields. Donkeys crossed rocky hillsides. Reindeer supported communities living in the far north. Although the animals varied, the skill remained remarkably similar. People learned to understand the creatures that shared their lives. The quiet relationship between humans and animals shaped civilization in countless unseen ways. As midday approaches, warm sunlight spreads across gardens bursting with herbs and vegetables. You find yourself walking beside an elderly gardener whose hands bear the marks of many seasons spent working the soil. She pauses beside a row of beans, climbing simple wooden poles. Without saying much, she gently removes a few unwanted weeds. The work appears almost effortless, yet behind every small movement lies years of careful observation. Gardening was another skill almost everyone once understood. Even families living inside crowded towns often grew herbs or vegetables wherever space allowed. Fresh food meant greater security. Medicinal herbs offered comfort during illness. Flowers attracted helpful insects while bringing beauty into everyday life. Gardens were places of work, but they were also places of quiet reflection. Imagine kneeling beside dark soil, warmed gently by the afternoon sun. A butterfly drifts lazily between blossoms. Bees move from flower to flower with steady purpose. The gardener explains that patience matters more than force. Seeds cannot be hurried. Rain cannot be commanded. Sunlight arrives in its own time. Much of gardening involves working with nature rather than against it. Perhaps that gentle truth reaches far beyond the garden itself. History often rewards those who learn patience. The afternoon breeze carries the pleasant smell of freshly cut grass across nearby fields. Children gather fallen branches for the evening fire. Their bundles are small, carefully chosen to match their strength. Nobody expects them to carry more than they can safely manage. Learning came little by little. Small responsibilities gradually became larger ones. In this way, confidence grew naturally. One forgotten skill followed children into adulthood almost without notice. It was the ability to wait. Modern life often celebrates speed. Messages arrive instantly. Travel takes hours instead of months. Food can appear within minutes. Yet for most of history, waiting formed an ordinary part of daily life. Waiting for bread to rise. Waiting for fruit to ripen. Waiting for winter to end. Waiting for travelers to return. Waiting for letters carried across great distances. Imagine sitting beneath the shade of an old oak tree during a warm afternoon. You hear distant sheep bells drifting gently across the hills. Clouds move slowly overhead. Nobody seems anxious about the passing hours. There is work to do, certainly. But there is also an acceptance that many important things cannot be rushed. Trees grow slowly. Children mature slowly. Friendships deepen slowly. Knowledge itself often arrives one season at a time. This quiet understanding shaped generations. As the day begins to cool once more, smoke rises gently from cooking fires across the village. fresh bread emerges from stone ovens. The comforting aroma mixes with roasted vegetables, herbs, and simple stews that have simmered patiently throughout the afternoon. Families return home from fields and workshops. Tools are cleaned before being stored. Boots are brushed free of mud. Animals receive fresh water before their owners think of their own supper. These small routines repeat day after day, year after year. Their repetition does not make them meaningless. Instead, repetition quietly strengthens both skill and character. You find yourself seated once again beside a warm fire. The room glows softly in the fading light. An elderly storyteller begins speaking in a calm voice. Not every story teaches through grand adventures. Some teach through ordinary lives: a careful farmer, a patient weaver, a wise shepherd, a thoughtful healer. Their quiet examples remind young listeners that steady work, kindness, observation, and humility often shape history more deeply than moments of sudden fame. Outside, darkness settles gently across the countryside. The stars return above fields that have witnessed countless generations learning the same simple lessons. The wind carries the scent of fresh hay and cooling earth. Tomorrow, another sunrise will reveal more forgotten skills that once belonged to nearly every person. Skills hidden not because they were mysterious, but because they became so ordinary that history rarely paused to write them down. And so, beneath the peaceful night sky, our gentle journey continues. The quiet village sleeps beneath a blanket of stars, while the moon casts a pale silver light across winding paths and peaceful fields. A gentle breeze moves through the branches of ancient trees, carrying the faint fragrance of wildflowers and fresh earth. Somewhere in the distance, water continues to flow over smooth stones, following the same course it has followed for centuries. Nothing seems hurried. Even time itself appears to move with calm and steady purpose. Imagine opening your eyes just before dawn. The sky is still deep blue, but a thin band of pale gold begins to appear along the eastern horizon. The air feels cool against your skin, and every breath carries the clean scent of morning. Birds remain quiet for a few moments longer, as though they too are waiting for the first touch of sunlight. Then, almost together, the village begins to awaken. A wooden door opens with a familiar creak. Someone places fresh logs onto a fire, and a few gentle sparks rise into the dim air. A rooster announces the coming day. Nearby, a baker kneads dough that has rested patiently through the night. These sounds are ordinary. They are the sounds of people whose lives are shaped by careful habits rather than hurried schedules. One forgotten skill that almost every person once learned was how to judge the passing seasons without looking at a calendar. Today, dates appear instantly on our phones and computers. Seasons are announced months in advance, and weather forecasts often describe what tomorrow may bring. Yet for most of history, ordinary people learned to recognize the changing year through countless small signs that surrounded them every day. Picture yourself walking beside an experienced farmer along the edge of a quiet field. He pauses for a moment and gently rubs a few leaves between his fingers. The air smells different now. The warmth of summer has begun to soften. A flock of birds passes overhead, flying in a direction they have followed for generations. Nearby trees carry tiny hints of changing color. None of these signs appear suddenly. Each arrives quietly. Together they tell a story. People noticed the first flowers that appeared after winter. They remembered when certain insects returned. They observed when rivers rose with melting snow. They watched animals prepare for colder months. The calendar lived all around them. Nature quietly marked each page. Many farming communities celebrated seasonal festivals, not only because of tradition, but because these moments reflected important changes in agricultural life. Planting, growing, harvesting, rest. Each season brought different work, different foods, and different routines. Children learned these patterns almost without realizing they were learning. Year after year, the rhythm settled naturally into memory. As the morning slowly arrives, sunlight stretches farther across the fields, warming the cool earth. Tiny spiders' webs glisten with dew, looking almost invisible until the light catches them. Bees begin their daily journeys between flowers, while butterflies drift gently through patches of wild herbs. You find yourself noticing something that many people once understood well. Every small part of nature has its own season. Wild berries appear only for a short time. Certain mushrooms emerge after particular rains. Fish travel upstream during familiar months. The best time to gather herbs often depends upon when they flower. Patience becomes one of history's quietest teachers. Another forgotten skill involved understanding fire. Modern homes often provide warmth with little effort. A button is pressed, a switch is turned, and heat quietly fills the room. For thousands of years, however, keeping a fire alive required steady attention. Imagine stepping into a simple cottage on a cool autumn morning. The fire from the previous evening has nearly faded. Only a few glowing embers remain beneath soft gray ash. An elderly woman kneels beside the hearth. She does not begin with large logs. Instead, she carefully places tiny pieces of dry wood over the remaining warmth. She blows gently. A thin ribbon of smoke rises. Soon, a small flame appears. Only then does she gradually add larger branches. The process feels almost peaceful. Nothing is wasted. Every movement reflects years of quiet experience. Children watched this routine countless times before they were trusted to do it themselves. They learned which wood burned quickly, which wood burned slowly, which branches produced too much smoke, which remained dry after rain. Fire offered warmth, cooked food, hardened pottery, shaped metal, and brought families together each evening. Yet it also demanded respect. Communities understood the danger of careless flames long before organized fire departments existed. Buckets of water stood nearby. Chimneys required cleaning. Cooking fires were carefully watched. Knowledge often grew from experience, sometimes from painful lessons remembered across generations. As the day continues, you walk toward the village workshop, where the steady tapping of wood echoes softly through the air. A wheelwright is repairing the wooden wheel of a farm cart. At first glance, the task appears straightforward, yet every piece must fit together with remarkable precision. The curved rim, the wooden spokes, the central hub. Each part supports the others. Imagine sitting quietly nearby as the craftsperson works. Freshly cut oak releases a pleasant earthy scent. Small curls of wood gather on the floor beneath the shaving knife. The wheel slowly takes shape. No measurement is rushed. Each adjustment is made carefully. The wheelwright knows that even a small mistake could cause problems during a long journey. This brings us to another forgotten skill. People once understood how to work slowly without becoming impatient. Many traditional crafts simply refused to be hurried. Clay needed time to dry. Leather required careful treatment. Bread demanded time to rise. Fresh timber often needed months or even years to season properly before being used in important buildings or furniture. Modern life sometimes encourages us to believe that faster is always better. History gently suggests something different. Certain things become stronger because they are given enough time. As afternoon sunlight filters through the trees, children gather beneath the shade of a large oak, where an elderly basket weaver is quietly working. Thin willow branches lie neatly beside him. His fingers move with remarkable confidence. One branch slips beneath another. Then another follows. Gradually, a sturdy basket begins to appear. Imagine watching without speaking. The weaving almost resembles flowing water. There is no force, only gentle guidance. Children imitate the movements using smaller branches. Their first baskets lean to one side. Some gaps appear larger than others. The old weaver smiles kindly. Mistakes are expected. Perfection is never demanded. Skill grows through repetition, not embarrassment. Across history, baskets carried grain, vegetables, fish, fruit, firewood, and countless other necessities. Many were beautifully made, despite being intended for ordinary work. Even everyday objects reflected quiet craftsmanship. The afternoon slowly begins to fade. Long shadows stretch across the fields. Workers return from gardens carrying fresh vegetables. Others arrive with bundles of herbs tied carefully together for drying. A shepherd leads sheep along a familiar path, the gentle sound of small bells drifting across the cooling air. Nearby, children gather fallen apples beneath an old orchard. Some fruit is perfect for eating. Others will become cider. A few are carefully set aside for winter storage. Almost nothing is wasted. This careful use of resources shaped everyday life for centuries. People learned to see possibilities where others might see leftovers. Worn clothing became patches. Animal bones became tools or useful materials. Ash from the fireplace enriched gardens. Broken pottery sometimes found new purpose in construction or drainage. The idea of giving objects another life was not considered unusual. It was simply sensible. As evening approaches once more, the village gradually grows quieter. Smoke curls gently upward from chimneys. The comforting aroma of vegetable stew, fresh bread, and roasted onions fills the cool air. Families gather around wooden tables polished smooth by generations of use. Simple meals become moments of conversation. Children describe what they learned that day. Older relatives quietly offer advice, often through stories rather than direct instruction. You find yourself listening to those calm voices. Their words are unhurried. No one interrupts. The youngest listeners sit quietly, absorbing far more than they realize. This, too, was one of humanity's forgotten skills. The ability to learn by listening with patience. Long before schools became widespread, homes, workshops, farms, and village squares served as classrooms. Knowledge traveled from one generation to the next through conversation, careful observation, and countless ordinary moments. Outside, darkness settles softly across the countryside once again. The stars appear one after another, just as they have since long before any written history. The fire crackles gently inside the cottage. Its warm glow reflects across familiar faces. Tomorrow will bring another peaceful sunrise, another collection of forgotten skills, another quiet chapter in the long story of ordinary people whose patient knowledge helped shape the world we know today. And with the gentle passing of another night, our journey through history continues. The evening fades so quietly that it is difficult to notice the exact moment when daylight becomes night. One by one, the final colors of sunset disappear behind the distant hills, leaving only a deep blue sky filled with familiar stars. A cool breeze slips gently through the narrow village lanes, carrying the comforting scent of wood smoke, freshly cut hay, and earth that still holds a little warmth from the afternoon sun. Imagine standing just outside the village for a moment. The houses behind you glow softly, with firelight shining through small windows. Somewhere nearby, a horse shifts gently inside its stable. Crickets begin their evening song, while an owl calls from an old oak tree standing at the edge of the woodland. There is no rush to fill every moment with noise. Silence is welcome here. For most people throughout history, quiet evenings were not empty. They were full of small sounds that gently marked the passing hours. As the morning slowly arrives, the stars gradually fade into the growing light. Mist hangs low over the fields, while tiny droplets of dew cover every blade of grass. The village slowly opens its eyes once again. Today, another forgotten skill quietly waits for us. It is something so ordinary that people rarely spoke about it. They simply expected everyone to learn. It was the skill of observing without disturbing. Picture yourself walking beside an experienced shepherd through a wide meadow just after sunrise. The grass brushes softly against your boots. A skylark rises into the brightening sky, singing high above the fields. The shepherd pauses for a moment. He notices fresh tracks pressed into the damp earth. Nearby, a rabbit disappears beneath a hedge. Nothing is chased. Nothing is frightened. The shepherd simply watches. Generations who lived close to nature understood that careful observation often revealed more than hurried action. They noticed where animals preferred to drink. They remembered which paths deer followed through the forest. They recognized nests hidden among reeds by watching the flight of birds rather than searching carelessly through every bush. This quiet respect for the natural world grew from familiarity. Many people depended upon healthy forests, rivers, grasslands, and fields. Disturbing them without reason offered little reward. Imagine sitting beside a peaceful pond. The surface is almost perfectly still. Dragonflies glide above the water like tiny jewels reflecting the morning light. A frog rests among reeds near the shore. At first, everything appears motionless. But the longer you remain still, the more life quietly reveals itself. Fish ripple the surface. A turtle slowly climbs onto a sun-warmed stone. Small insects dance across the water without breaking its calm appearance. History teaches us that patience often uncovers details invisible to hurried eyes. Another forgotten skill almost everyone once developed was understanding the weight of ordinary objects. Today, machines often lift heavy loads for us. For earlier generations, the body itself became remarkably skilled at judging weight. Imagine entering a busy marketplace. Farmers arrive carrying sacks of grain over their shoulders. A potter carefully lifts fresh clay. A baker judges the weight of dough simply by holding it in both hands. A merchant raises a basket of apples and quietly estimates its value before placing it upon a scale. Years of daily practice sharpened these instincts. Carpenters learned how much timber they could safely carry. Builders understood how to move heavy stones together using teamwork instead of unnecessary force. Women carrying water-balanced jars with graceful confidence earned through repetition. Even children slowly learned what their growing bodies could manage safely. Strength mattered, but knowing one's limits mattered just as much. Communities often valued steady effort more than reckless displays of power. As the sun climbs higher, warm light fills workshops throughout the village. You find yourself stepping inside the home of a weaver. Wooden beams support the roof overhead. The air carries the faint scent of wool and freshly spun flax. A large loom stands quietly near the window, where sunlight falls across carefully arranged threads. The weaver begins working, back and forth, again and again. The rhythm remains slow and steady. Each movement builds upon the last. One thread alone cannot create cloth. Thousands working together become something strong and useful. Imagine watching for several peaceful minutes. The pattern grows almost unnoticed. At first, little seems to change. Yet by the end of the morning, an entirely new section of fabric has appeared. This gentle lesson quietly reflects much of history itself. Great achievements often emerge through countless small actions, repeated with care. Most people throughout history understood this naturally because their daily work constantly reminded them. Nothing lasting appeared all at once. Another forgotten skill involved recognizing the right moment to harvest. Modern farming often relies upon carefully measured schedules and advanced equipment. Earlier generations depended largely upon careful observation. Picture yourself standing in a field of grain near the end of summer. Golden heads sway gently beneath a light breeze. An experienced farmer rubs a few grains between weathered fingers. He studies their color, their firmness, their dryness. Harvesting too early risks poor storage. Waiting too long may invite storms or hungry birds. Choosing the proper moment becomes a quiet conversation between people and nature. No machine makes the decision. Experience does. Children watched these choices year after year until they, too, understood the subtle signs. The knowledge rarely arrived through formal lessons. Instead, it settled gently into memory after many seasons. By afternoon, warm sunlight blankets the countryside. Workers pause beneath the shade of large trees to enjoy simple meals. Fresh bread, cheese, seasonal fruit, cool water drawn from a nearby spring. Imagine joining them. Conversation flows gently. Nobody speaks loudly. Stories move naturally between practical advice and quiet memories. An older farmer remembers an unusually cold spring many years ago. A shepherd recalls finding lost sheep after following the calls of ravens circling above a hillside. A grandmother smiles, while describing how her own mother taught her to bake bread by listening to the sound of the crust rather than watching the clock. Each story carries knowledge. Not every lesson begins with the words, "Let me teach you." Often wisdom arrives hidden inside ordinary conversation. Perhaps that is why people remembered it so well. As the afternoon slowly cools, you walk toward the edge of a forest where several villagers are gathering fallen branches. Notice something important. They collect wood already resting upon the ground. Only occasionally do they cut a living tree, and even then, the decision is made carefully. Throughout many historical communities, people understood that forests needed time to renew themselves. Practices differed from one region to another, and not every community protected woodlands equally well. There were certainly periods of heavy deforestation in history. Yet many villages developed local customs that balanced immediate needs with future supplies. The forest was treated as a trusted neighbor. It provided shelter, fuel, building materials, berries, mushrooms, medicinal plants, and places where animals could thrive. Protecting it often protected the community itself. As evening approaches, soft golden light washes across fields ready for tomorrow's work. Children laugh while racing home along familiar paths. A dog follows close behind, its tail wagging happily. The blacksmith places the final tool of the day upon a wooden shelf. The potter covers unfinished clay to keep it from drying too quickly. Every craft pauses until morning. There is wisdom even in stopping. Not every hour belongs to work. Families gather around evening meals. The smell of slow-cooked vegetables, herbs, and fresh bread fills the cottages once again. Someone quietly mends a fishing net while listening to an elderly relative tell stories from decades earlier. A child carefully copies each movement, though no one has formally asked. Learning continues even after the day's labor has ended. You find yourself sitting near the warm fire once more. Outside, darkness gently settles across the sleeping fields. The stars return in familiar patterns, just as they guided travelers, sailors, shepherds, and dreamers long before maps became common. Looking upward, you begin to understand that these forgotten skills were never truly separate from everyday life. They were everyday life. They shaped how people worked, traveled, rested, raised children, shared knowledge, cared for neighbors, and understood the changing world around them. Many have faded from ordinary experience, yet their quiet wisdom remains woven through history, waiting patiently for anyone willing to slow down and notice. The fire burns a little lower. The voices around it grow softer. Another peaceful day comes to its natural close. And as sleep gently settles over the quiet village once again, our journey into the forgotten skills of ordinary people continues, one calm story at a time. The fire has burned down to a bed of glowing embers. Their warm orange light dances gently across the wooden floor, while the last conversations of the evening fade into comfortable silence. Outside, the village rests beneath a sky so clear that every familiar constellation seems close enough to touch. A cool breeze moves softly through the trees, carrying the scent of pine, damp earth, and the distant sweetness of wildflowers growing beyond the fields. Imagine stepping quietly outside before anyone else has awakened. The world feels wonderfully still, Even the smallest sounds become easy to notice. A single leaf falls from a nearby tree. Water drips slowly from yesterday's rain, landing softly upon smooth stones beside a narrow stream. Far away, a fox disappears into the edge of the forest, leaving only faint footprints behind. For much of history, mornings like this were among the best times to observe the world. People whose lives depended upon the land learned to welcome these peaceful hours. As the morning slowly arrives, a pale golden light spreads across the eastern sky. Mist rises gently from rivers and ponds, floating low across the meadows before slowly disappearing into the warming air. Birds begin greeting one another with cheerful songs, and smoke once again curls upward from village chimneys. A new day has begun, and with it comes another forgotten skill that once belonged to almost everyone. It is the ability to remember without writing everything down. Today, we quickly store information in notebooks, calendars, phones, and computers. We trust devices to remember birthdays, shopping lists, directions, appointments, and countless other details. For most people in history, however, memory itself served as the greatest library they possessed. Picture yourself sitting beside an elderly grandmother during the quiet hours after breakfast. She begins preparing bread while speaking gently to her grandchildren. Without opening a book, she recalls the exact order of planting vegetables through the seasons. She remembers which neighbor borrowed a tool several months ago. She can describe the path to a distant village by naming familiar hills, streams, orchards, and old oak trees along the way. She remembers songs her own grandmother sang many decades earlier. None of this feels unusual. It is simply how knowledge survives. Long before widespread literacy became common, memory carried family histories, local customs, practical advice, recipes, seasonal knowledge, and stories that helped communities understand their place in the world. This does not mean everyone remembered everything perfectly. People forgot details just as we do today. Yet they exercised memory every single day because they had little choice. Like any skill, it became stronger through regular use. Imagine walking beside a shepherd leading sheep across rolling hills. He counts each animal without writing a single number. 1, 2, 3. The rhythm continues almost effortlessly. Years later, he will still recognize every sheep in the flock, not by numbered tags, but by subtle differences in face, size, markings, and behavior. His eyes and memory work together quietly. Many craftspeople developed similar abilities. Blacksmiths remembered dozens of customers and their tools. Millers recognized families by the grain they brought to the mill. Midwives remembered births that had taken place years earlier. Merchants recalled regular customers without needing detailed records for every small exchange. Communities remained small enough that faces became familiar, and familiarity quietly strengthened memory. As the sun rises higher, you walk toward the village bakery. Warm bread fills the air with a comforting aroma that seems to welcome everyone passing by. The baker lifts several loaves from the oven using a long wooden peel. Notice something interesting. He does not rely only on time. He watches the color of the crust. He listens to the gentle crackling sound as fresh bread cools. He lightly taps the bottom of a loaf to judge whether it is baked properly. This leads us to another forgotten skill. People once trusted all of their senses while working. Modern technology often gives us measurements displayed on screens. Earlier generations relied upon sight, hearing, smell, touch, and even taste. Imagine a cheesemaker quietly examining fresh cheese. A slight change in aroma tells an experienced craftsperson more than many written instructions. A brewer listens to gentle bubbling during fermentation. A potter feels the moisture remaining inside clay. A gardener smells rain approaching before dark clouds fully gather. These observations were not mysterious talents. They were ordinary habits, developed through years of careful attention. You find yourself becoming more aware of your own surroundings. The warmth of sunlight upon your shoulders, the cool breeze moving through nearby trees, the distant sound of children laughing beside a stream. History gently reminds us that the human senses are remarkable when given the opportunity to notice. By late morning, the village marketplace begins filling with familiar faces. Farmers display baskets of vegetables gathered only hours earlier. Honey glows softly inside clay jars. Fresh herbs release their pleasant fragrance as people pass by. A cooper rolls a newly finished barrel into place. Nearby, a woman carefully examines a length of woven cloth before agreeing to purchase it. Imagine standing quietly among them. Nobody seems hurried. Buying and selling are conversations as much as transactions. People ask about each other's families. They discuss weather, harvests, and travelers arriving from neighboring towns. Trust grows over years rather than moments. Reputation quietly becomes one of the most valuable possessions a person can have. This, too, was a forgotten skill. Earning confidence, slowly through consistent honesty. Many communities relied heavily upon trust because formal contracts were not always practical for everyday exchanges. A person's word often carried great weight. Keeping promises strengthened relationships that lasted across generations. As afternoon arrives, gentle warmth settles across fields and gardens. You follow an elderly woman gathering herbs along the edge of a woodland. She pauses before picking each plant, never taking too much from one place, leaving healthy plants behind, allowing nature to renew itself. Across many cultures, experienced gatherers understood that careful harvesting protected future supplies. Again, practices differed from region to region, and not every community always succeeded in maintaining balance. Yet many people recognized that taking everything today often meant having nothing tomorrow. History quietly rewards those who think beyond a single season. The afternoon breeze carries the scent of flowering thyme and sun-warmed grass. Butterflies drift lazily between blossoms. A pair of swallows swoop gracefully overhead, collecting insects as they fly. You find yourself sitting beneath the broad branches of an old tree. Nearby, a grandfather patiently teaches his grandson how to carve a simple wooden spoon. The knife moves slowly. Thin curls of wood fall gently onto the ground. The child presses a little too hard. The spoon becomes slightly uneven. The grandfather simply smiles. "There is enough wood left," he says softly. "We can keep shaping it." Perhaps this is one of history's kindest lessons. Mistakes are often part of learning rather than signs of failure. Many traditional skills developed because learners were given time to improve. Perfection rarely appeared on the first attempt. Patience created confidence. Confidence encouraged practice. Practice slowly became mastery. As evening approaches, long golden shadows stretch across the village once again. Workers finish their final tasks before returning home. The blacksmith cools the last piece of iron. The shepherd counts every sheep one final time. Children gather eggs from the chicken coop while laughing quietly together. Smoke begins rising from cottage chimneys, carrying the familiar scent of cooking fires into the cool evening air. Inside one home, a family prepares supper. Fresh bread rests beside a pot of vegetable stew. A small bowl of berries gathered earlier in the day waits upon the table. Simple food, simple conversation, simple gratitude. These ordinary evenings were repeated so many times across so many centuries that history rarely stopped to describe them. Yet they formed the quiet foundation upon which civilizations were built. Not through grand ceremonies, not through dramatic moments, but through countless peaceful routines carried out with care. Outside, the first stars appear above the darkening countryside. The wind whispers softly through fields ready for tomorrow's sunrise. The village grows quiet once more. You find yourself looking upward, wondering how many generations before you stood beneath this same sky, learning these same gentle lessons. Their names may have faded with time, but their knowledge continues to echo through history. It lives in every carefully repaired tool, every patiently tended garden, every loaf of bread shared among neighbors, and every story passed from one generation to the next. As the fire settles into glowing embers once again, another peaceful chapter comes to a close. Our journey is far from over. There are still many forgotten skills waiting quietly along the winding paths of history, ready to reveal themselves with the next gentle sunrise. The final embers glow softly beneath a thin layer of ash, offering just enough warmth to keep the chill of the night outside. The cottage has fallen silent. Somewhere in a nearby corner, a dog sighs quietly in its sleep before settling once more. Beyond the wooden walls, the countryside rests beneath a sky scattered with stars that have guided travelers, farmers, shepherds, and sailors for countless generations. Imagine standing beneath that endless sky for a few peaceful moments. There is no sound except the gentle rustling of leaves, stirred by a light breeze, and the distant murmur of a stream flowing steadily through the darkness. Without bright lights to dim their brilliance, the stars appear countless in number. They stretch from one horizon to the other, reminding every traveler that the night has always been a companion rather than an enemy. As the morning slowly arrives, the stars begin to fade, one after another, until only the brightest remain. A cool mist settles across the fields, and the first rays of sunlight gently awaken the village. Doors open, roosters call. Smoke rises from familiar chimneys. Another ordinary day begins, carrying with it another quiet lesson from the past. Today we discover a forgotten skill that once connected nearly every family to the wider world. It was the ability to recognize direction without modern tools. Today, many people carry devices that instantly reveal where they are and how to reach almost any destination. Yet for thousands of years, travelers crossed forests, valleys, rivers, mountains, and open plains with nothing more than careful observation, memory, and experience. Picture yourself walking beside an elderly trader who has traveled the same route for many decades. The path ahead bends gently around a hillside. There are no painted signs, no numbered roads, no electronic voices offering instructions. Instead, the trader quietly notices the position of the rising sun. He recognizes a line of old beech trees growing along the edge of the road. Far ahead, the shape of a distant hill tells him exactly where the next river crossing lies. He smiles gently. The land itself has become a map. Many travelers throughout history developed remarkable familiarity with their surroundings. Sailors watched the stars and the movement of waves. Desert caravans followed landmarks that seemed invisible to strangers. Mountain shepherds remembered every narrow pass, every sheltered valley, and every spring where fresh water could be found. None of these abilities appeared overnight. They grew slowly through years of experience. Imagine pausing beside a weathered stone standing alone near an ancient road. To someone passing by for the first time, it may seem ordinary. But to local travelers, it marks a familiar turning point, remembered across generations. History reminds us that landscapes carry memories just as people do. Another forgotten skill was understanding the language of footprints. Long before scientific tracking became a specialized field, ordinary people often noticed signs left upon the ground. Picture yourself walking beside a hunter shortly after sunrise. The earth is still soft from rain that fell during the night. The hunter kneels quietly beside a patch of damp soil. Without speaking, he points towards several clear impressions. They belong to a deer. Nearby, smaller prints reveal where a fox passed during the night. Tiny bird tracks weave playful patterns through the mud. Even a child begins to notice the differences. Not because the lesson is difficult, but because someone has patiently shown where to look. Tracking served many purposes beyond hunting. Farmers searched for missing animals. Parents looked for children who had wandered beyond familiar paths. Travelers noticed whether a road had recently been used. Footprints quietly revealed stories that words could not. As the sun climbs higher into the morning sky, the village marketplace slowly comes to life. The air fills with the pleasant aroma of fresh bread, ripe fruit, herbs, and warm pastries cooling upon wooden tables. Voices remain calm. People greet one another by name. Trade begins without hurry. Here we discover another forgotten skill. People once became remarkably good judges of character through long acquaintance rather than brief impressions. Imagine watching two merchants greet each other. No written contract appears between them. Instead, years of honest dealings have built quiet confidence. Each remembers promises kept through difficult seasons. Each knows the other's family. Trust has been earned one small act at a time. Of course, history also reminds us that trust could be broken. Dishonest merchants certainly existed, just as they do today. Yet communities often relied heavily upon reputation because people expected to meet one another again. Actions carried lasting consequences. This encouraged fairness in countless ordinary exchanges. By midday, warm sunlight spreads gently across gardens and orchards. Children help gather vegetables ready for the day's meal. An elderly gardener pauses beside a row of onions. Without measuring tools, she spaces each plant almost perfectly. Years of practice have trained both her hands and her eyes. This brings us to another forgotten skill: estimating distance. Builders judged the length of beams. Farmers spaced seeds. Stonemasons aligned walls. Weavers measured thread. Potters shaped matching bowls. Many tasks depended upon careful estimation long before precise measuring instruments became widely available. Practice quietly sharpened these abilities until they became almost second nature. Imagine sitting beside a mason, repairing a low stone wall. He studies each rock carefully before placing it. Some stones appear too large, others seem too small. Yet after a little adjustment, each finds its proper place. The wall grows stronger, not because every stone is identical, but because every stone is understood. Perhaps there is another gentle lesson hidden here. Strength often comes from careful balance rather than perfect uniformity. The afternoon breeze carries the scent of lavender, growing beside cottage doors. Honeybees continue their patient work among flowering herbs. Nearby, a young girl follows her grandmother into a small orchard. Together, they gather fallen apples. Some are polished and placed into baskets. Others, though slightly bruised, will still become preserves or cider. Nothing useful is ignored. Resourcefulness once shaped nearly every household. People learned to look beyond appearances. A cracked bowl might still hold grain. An old blanket could become warm clothing for a child. Even worn leather found new life as straps or patches. Waste was a luxury few families could afford. As a result, creativity quietly became part of daily living. Throughout history, necessity often inspired remarkable practical solutions. The afternoon slowly begins to cool. Golden light stretches across the countryside. A cooper rolls newly finished barrels into the shade. Nearby, the steady rhythm of a spinning wheel drifts from an open doorway. Inside, an elderly woman patiently spins wool into thread. The wheel turns smoothly. Her hands remain calm. The thread grows longer almost without interruption. Imagine watching for several peaceful minutes. The movement becomes almost hypnotic, steady, gentle, unhurried. Children watching nearby soon understand something important. Skill is not always loud. Very often, true mastery appears quiet. There is no need for dramatic gestures, only consistent care. As evening approaches once more, families gradually return home from fields, workshops, gardens, and forests. The familiar scent of supper begins drifting through the village. Soup simmers slowly over open fires. Fresh herbs flavor simple meals. Bread baked earlier in the day is broken and shared around wooden tables worn smooth by generations. Conversation flows easily. Someone remembers an unusually snowy winter, many years ago. Another recalls how neighbors worked together to repair a bridge after heavy rains. Children listen carefully while pretending not to. Little by little, history settles gently into young minds, not as dates to memorize, but as stories connected to real people and familiar places. Outside, twilight spreads quietly across the landscape. The last birds return to their nests. Bats begin their graceful evening flights above open fields. The stars appear once more, patient and unchanged. You find yourself realizing that many forgotten skills were never extraordinary. They belong to ordinary people living ordinary lives. Yet together, they formed an extraordinary foundation of knowledge built across thousands of years. These were skills of observation, patience, memory, care, respect for nature, respect for neighbors, respect for time itself. As the fire settles into glowing embers once again, another peaceful day slips gently into history. The quiet village rests beneath the stars, while our own journey continues onward, following the calm footsteps of those whose forgotten wisdom still lingers softly beneath the surface of the modern world. The village rests beneath another peaceful night, wrapped in gentle silence. The stars seem brighter now, scattered across the sky like tiny lanterns that have watched over humanity since long before written history. A cool wind drifts through the fields, carrying the comforting scent of ripe grain, wild mint growing beside a stream, and distant pine forests standing quietly beneath the moonlight. Imagine sitting just outside a small cottage before sleep finally arrives. The warmth from the evening fire still lingers in the stones of the hearth behind you. Somewhere nearby, sheep settle into the safety of their enclosure. A horse stamps gently inside its stable before becoming still once again. Nothing demands your attention. The night simply invites you to listen. For countless generations, evenings like this allowed people to think quietly about the day that had passed and the work waiting for tomorrow. As the morning slowly arrives, darkness gently loosens its hold upon the land. The eastern sky brightens little by little, changing from deep blue to pale silver before the first rays of sunlight spread across the fields. Tiny droplets of dew sparkle on every leaf, while birds begin their familiar songs as though welcoming another chapter in a story that has never truly ended. The village awakens. A blacksmith opens the heavy wooden door of his workshop. A baker places fresh dough into the warmth of the oven. Children carry small baskets toward the garden. The ordinary rhythm of life begins again. Today, we continue exploring another forgotten skill that almost every person once developed. It is the ability to notice change. Modern life often moves so quickly that small changes escape our attention. Yet for people who depended upon fields, forests, rivers, and animals, noticing even the smallest difference could prove remarkably important. Picture yourself walking beside an elderly farmer through a familiar orchard. At first glance, everything appears exactly as it did yesterday. But the farmer quietly points toward one apple tree. Its leaves seem slightly lighter than the others. Another branch has begun bending beneath the growing fruit. Nearby, a few insects have appeared that were not there only a week before. None of these changes are dramatic. Yet together they quietly reveal how the season is unfolding. Throughout history, ordinary people became careful observers because their daily lives encouraged such attention. A shepherd noticed when fresh grass began growing upon distant hills. A fisherman recognized subtle changes in the movement of water. A potter understood how humid weather affected drying clay. A miller listened for changes in the sound of the water wheel after heavy rain. These observations were not extraordinary gifts. They were habits patiently strengthened through years of living closely with the natural world. imagine standing beside a slow-moving river just after sunrise. Mist still floats gently above the water. A kingfisher suddenly dives before rising again with a tiny fish held firmly in its beak. An elderly fisherman watches without surprise. He has seen this many times before. Yet today, he also notices something else. The current has become slightly stronger after rain in the hills. Floating leaves drift a little faster downstream. The water appears clearer than it did a few days earlier. These details quietly guide his decisions. Experience teaches him where fish are most likely to gather. History often celebrates dramatic discoveries. But much of human knowledge grew through the patient accumulation of thousands of quiet observations like these. As the sun climbs higher into the sky, warmth spreads gently across gardens and workshops. You find yourself entering the small home of a candle maker. The room carries the soft scent of beeswax. Several finished candles stand cooling upon a wooden table. Nearby, thin cotton wicks wait patiently beside a pot of warm wax. The craftsperson dips each wick slowly, again and again. Each layer cools before another is added. The candle grows almost unnoticed. This brings us to another forgotten skill, understanding that many worthwhile things cannot be completed in a single attempt. Throughout history, people repeated small actions countless times. A weaver passed thread through a loom thousands of times before finishing a piece of cloth. A mason placed one stone after another until an entire wall appeared. A cooper shaped each wooden stave before a barrel finally held water. Progress often arrived quietly, not through sudden bursts of effort, but through steady repetition. Perhaps this is why patience appears again and again in the lives of ordinary people throughout history. By midday, the marketplace fills with familiar activity. Merchants arrange baskets filled with onions, carrots, beans, apples, herbs, and freshly baked bread. Children carry small bundles that match their growing strength. A woman carefully examines a clay pot before smiling with satisfaction. Imagine walking slowly among them. No one rushes from stall to stall. People pause to greet neighbors. Questions are asked. News is exchanged. Laughter rises gently before blending once more into the peaceful rhythm of conversation. Markets were more than places of trade. They were places where communities renewed their connections. News traveled. Friendships deepened. Skills spread from one village to another. A traveler might describe a new farming technique seen many miles away. A visiting blacksmith could demonstrate a useful improvement to an old tool. Knowledge often moved along the same roads as merchants. Another forgotten skill was learning through watching rather than interrupting. Picture yourself inside a cooper's workshop. An apprentice stands quietly nearby. The master does not explain every movement. Instead, the apprentice watches closely. How tightly the iron hoops fit. How carefully each wooden stave is shaped. How every piece contributes to the finished barrel. Days pass, then weeks. Eventually, the apprentice begins assisting. Months later, simple tasks become familiar. Years afterward, the apprentice may become the master. Observation formed the first stage of countless traditional apprenticeships. Listening, watching, practicing, improving. This slow progression allowed knowledge to pass faithfully across generations. As the afternoon breeze cools the fields, you walk toward a quiet meadow where several children gather wildflowers under the watchful eyes of an older relative. They are not collecting every flower they see. Some blossoms remain untouched. The older woman gently explains that bees still need them. Seeds must still form. Nature must continue its own work. Whether gathering herbs, berries, mushrooms, or flowers, many communities developed customs that encouraged thoughtful harvesting. Practices naturally varied across different lands and cultures. Yet the underlying lesson appeared again and again. Take what you need. Leave enough for tomorrow. This quiet wisdom echoes across centuries. The afternoon sun begins its slow descent. Golden light washes across rooftops and open fields. The sounds of work gradually soften. A spinning wheel turns for the final time today. A shepherd closes the pasture gate. The village blacksmith places cooling iron tools neatly upon a wooden bench. Everything has its place. Order itself becomes another forgotten skill. People cared for tools because replacing them demanded time and effort. Returning each item to its proper place saved valuable moments the following morning. Small habits quietly supported larger responsibilities. As evening approaches, families gather once more around warm hearths. Fresh bread is shared. Vegetable stew simmers gently. Someone slices apples gathered earlier in the day. A grandfather begins telling a story from his own childhood. He speaks not of famous rulers, but of an unusually rainy harvest season, when neighbors worked together to save each other's crops. The children listen carefully. Hidden inside the story are lessons about kindness, cooperation, preparation, and gratitude. History has always been carried not only by books, but also by voices. You find yourself watching the flames dance gently inside the fireplace. Their soft crackling blends with quiet conversation. Outside, the first stars return to the evening sky. A cool breeze stirs the leaves of nearby trees. The familiar world slowly settles into peaceful darkness once again. Looking back upon another ordinary day, it becomes easier to understand why these forgotten skills endured for so many centuries. They did not belong to scholars alone. They belonged to farmers, potters, shepherds, bakers, carpenters, sailors, weavers, gardeners, blacksmiths, mothers, fathers, grandparents, and curious children. They were the quiet knowledge that helped ordinary people live meaningful lives. Although many of these skills have faded from everyday experience, their spirit remains. Every act of patient observation, every carefully repaired object, every shared meal, every lesson passed gently from one generation to the next. These are echoes of a world that still has much to teach us. The fire burns lower. The voices become softer. The stars continue their silent journey overhead. And as another peaceful night embraces the village, our own journey through history moves gently onward, ready to uncover still more forgotten skills with the coming dawn. The village has grown quiet once more. Only the gentle crackle of fading firewood and the soft whisper of the night wind remain. The moon hangs peacefully above the rooftops, bathing narrow paths, wooden fences, and distant fields in a pale silver light. Every familiar place seems transformed by the calm of darkness, yet nothing feels unfamiliar. The land has settled into its nightly rhythm, one that has repeated itself through thousands of seasons. Imagine taking a slow walk beneath this peaceful sky. Your footsteps are softened by the earth beneath you. Somewhere in the distance, a stream reflects the moonlight like a ribbon of polished glass. A barn owl glides silently over an open meadow before disappearing into the shadows of an old oak tree. The cool air carries the scent of fresh grass, damp soil, and the faint sweetness of flowering herbs that continue releasing their fragrance long after sunset. For generations, nights like this invited people to slow their thoughts. Without bright lamps or constant distractions, the world naturally encouraged quiet reflection. As the morning slowly arrives, the eastern horizon begins to glow with delicate shades of silver and pale gold. A rooster calls from somewhere beyond the cottages. Smoke begins rising from chimneys, and one by one, wooden doors open as another ordinary day quietly begins. You find yourself walking toward the center of the village, where familiar sounds gradually fill the air. A hand mill begins turning. A bucket lowers into the village well. Someone sweeps the path outside a cottage. The blacksmith prepares the forge for another day's work. Every sound belongs exactly where it should. Today we discover another forgotten skill that almost every household once practiced. It was the careful management of supplies. Modern stores often allow us to replace everyday items with little planning. If flour runs low, another bag can usually be purchased. If candles burn out, more can often be found with relative ease. For much of history, however, people planned far beyond the needs of a single day. Picture yourself inside a farmhouse shortly after harvest. Wooden shelves are lined with clay jars. Bundles of dried herbs hang neatly from ceiling beams. Grain rests safely inside sturdy bins protected from moisture. Apples are carefully arranged so they do not spoil one another. Each item has been placed thoughtfully. Nothing has been stored carelessly. The family understands that the abundance of autumn must last through the uncertainty of winter. This quiet habit required more than hard work. It required foresight. Imagine an elderly woman opening a large storage chest. She smiles gently as she counts folded pieces of cloth woven months earlier. Nearby, sacks of beans and barley remain untouched. She does not use everything simply because it is available. Instead, she measures each season against the next. The wisdom here is simple. Good times prepare for difficult ones. Many communities throughout history understood this naturally, because the changing seasons reminded them every year. One generous harvest could not guarantee another. Planning brought peace of mind. Another forgotten skill involved recognizing the value of ordinary materials. Today, many manufactured goods hide the origins of the things around us. Yet earlier generations often knew exactly where nearly every object came from. Imagine standing beside a carpenter, shaping a wooden stool. He knows which forest supplied the oak. The blacksmith who forged the nails lives only a short walk away. The rope supporting the workbench was twisted by local hands. Nothing feels anonymous. Every object carries a story. Children growing up in such communities naturally learned where things originated. They understood that leather once came from carefully prepared hides. That linen began as flax growing in nearby fields. That clay pots started as earth gathered beside the river. Knowledge of materials created appreciation. People cared for belongings because they understood the effort hidden inside them. As the morning sunlight grows warmer, you walk toward a meadow where several families are gathering hay. The grass has already been cut and left to dry beneath clear skies. Now it must be collected before unexpected rain arrives. Picture yourself watching the workers. No one rushes ahead alone. Some rake the hay into long rows. Others lift it onto wooden carts. Children gather loose handfuls left behind. The oldest members of the group offer advice based upon many years of experience. This reminds us of another forgotten skill: working together without needing constant instruction. Many traditional tasks depended upon cooperation. Barns were raised by neighbors, harvests were completed together, roads were repaired collectively, wells were maintained for everyone. Communities understood that certain jobs became easier when many willing hands shared the effort. Of course, not every village lived in perfect harmony. Disagreements certainly existed throughout history. Yet cooperation remained essential, because survival often depended upon it. As midday arrives, warm sunlight bathes the countryside. The workers pause beneath the shade of broad trees. Simple meals appear from woven baskets: fresh bread, soft cheese, seasonal fruit, cool water carried from a nearby spring. Imagine sitting quietly among them. Conversation drifts gently from one topic to another. Someone speaks about the weather. Another remembers an unusually long winter from many years ago. A child asks why swallows return each spring. An elderly shepherd smiles before patiently explaining the bird's long journey. No classroom surrounds them. Yet learning continues. History reminds us that curiosity often grows best in ordinary moments. The afternoon breeze begins to stir, carrying the pleasant scent of drying hay across the fields. Nearby, a young apprentice accompanies a village cooper. Today, the lesson is not about building an entire barrel. Instead, the apprentice learns how to choose suitable wood. The cooper picks up one piece after another. Some are rejected immediately. Others receive closer attention. The apprentice watches carefully. Soon he begins noticing the same small differences. Straight grain, healthy timber, proper seasoning. This quiet exercise teaches another forgotten skill: learning to judge quality before beginning a task. Experienced craftspeople understood that careful preparation often prevented future problems. The strongest building began with suitable timber. The finest bread depended upon good grain. The smoothest cloth required well-spun thread. Success rarely depended upon luck alone. Preparation quietly shaped the outcome. As afternoon slowly gives way to evening, you stroll beside the village gardens. The air is filled with the gentle humming of bees moving from blossom to blossom. Butterflies drift lazily above flowering herbs. A gardener waters young plants using rainwater collected in wooden barrels. Nothing is wasted. Even rainfall has been thoughtfully preserved. Resourcefulness appears once again. Throughout history, people learned to make thoughtful use of what nature generously provided. The day gradually cools. Long shadows stretch across stone walls and winding paths. Families begin returning home. A shepherd closes the gate after counting every sheep. The blacksmith sweeps the workshop floor before covering valuable tools. A weaver carefully folds unfinished cloth, protecting it from dust until tomorrow. These small closing rituals mark the peaceful end of another day's work. Inside the cottages, fires are lit once more. The familiar aroma of supper fills the evening air. Stews simmer gently. Fresh bread is broken into warm bowls. Children eagerly describe what they noticed during the day. An older relative listens with quiet patience before adding a story from long ago. Knowledge passes naturally across the table, not as formal instruction, but as shared experience. You find yourself watching the flames rise and fall inside the hearth. The steady light dances across familiar faces. Outside, the stars return one by one. The same stars watched ancient farmers plan their harvests, guided merchants along distant roads, comforted shepherds during quiet nights, and inspired countless children to wonder about the vast world beyond their village. The forgotten skills we have followed are not remarkable because they belonged to extraordinary people. They are remarkable because they belonged to almost everyone. Their quiet wisdom lived inside ordinary routines, repeated through countless generations. Planning ahead, caring for simple possessions, working together, preparing patiently, respecting nature's rhythms, passing knowledge through calm conversation. These were the unnoticed threads that quietly held communities together. As the fire settles into glowing embers once more, another peaceful chapter gently comes to its close. Tomorrow's sunrise will reveal still more forgotten skills, hidden not in grand palaces or famous battles, but in the quiet lives of ordinary people whose patient knowledge helped shape the history of the world. The last embers of the evening fire glow softly beneath a blanket of pale ash. Their gentle warmth slowly fades into the quiet room, where familiar wooden beams have watched over generations of peaceful evenings, just like this one. Outside, the village sleeps beneath a sky filled with stars. The fields rest after another day's work, while distant forests stand silently beneath the moonlight, their ancient branches moving ever so gently in the cool night breeze. Imagine remaining awake for just a little while longer. Not because there is more work to do, but because the stillness itself feels comforting. The sounds around you are wonderfully ordinary. A horse shifts quietly inside its stable. A stream continues its patient journey toward a distant river. The wind brushes softly through tall grass before disappearing into the darkness beyond the village. For thousands of years, evenings like this marked the natural close of another day. They asked for nothing except gratitude, rest, and quiet reflection. As the morning slowly arrives one final time, the eastern sky slowly brightens with soft shades of silver, rose, and pale gold. The stars disappear one by one, leaving only the brightest to greet the coming sun. Birds begin their morning chorus, and tiny drops of dew shimmer upon every leaf before slowly disappearing beneath the growing warmth of daylight. The village awakens again. The baker prepares another batch of bread. The shepherd opens the pasture gate. The potter checks the clay that has rested overnight. The blacksmith lights the forge. Children step outside carrying small baskets, eager to help with whatever the new day may bring. Nothing appears unusual. And perhaps that is exactly the point. Throughout our journey, we have explored forgotten skills that once belonged to nearly everyone. None of them were famous. None required extraordinary talent. Most never appeared in the pages of royal chronicles or grand historical records. Yet together, they quietly supported civilizations across continents and centuries. People learned to watch the sky. They learned to notice changing seasons. They repaired clothing instead of discarding it. They sharpened tools until they served faithfully for years. They stored food carefully for uncertain winters. They carried water with steady hands. They understood forests, rivers, fields, gardens, and animals through patient observation. They listened. They remembered. They worked together. They planned ahead. They shared what they knew. These were not separate lessons. They formed a single way of living. Imagine walking one final time along the quiet lane that winds through the village. Morning sunlight now reaches every rooftop. The smell of fresh bread drifts from the bakery. Children laugh while chasing chickens that refuse to cooperate. A cooper pauses to greet a passing shepherd. A gardener kneels beside herbs, sparkling with dew. An elderly woman opens her window to let fresh air fill the cottage. Everywhere you look, ordinary people are quietly practicing knowledge gathered across countless generations. No one stops to admire these skills because they are simply part of life. History often celebrates great inventions, remarkable rulers, famous explorers, and extraordinary battles. Those stories certainly matter. They changed kingdoms, borders, and governments. Yet beneath every famous event stood millions of ordinary people whose quiet abilities allowed society itself to continue. Without farmers, there would have been no harvests. Without carpenters, there would have been no homes. Without potters, there would have been no vessels for storing food and water. Without weavers, there would have been no warm clothing through winter. Without blacksmiths, countless tools would never have existed. Without mothers, fathers, grandparents, neighbors, and patient teachers passing practical knowledge from one generation to the next, civilization itself could never have endured. History does not belong only to kings. It belongs equally to the anonymous hands that built walls one stone at a time, to the shepherd who guided sheep safely home before a storm, to the baker rising long before sunrise, to the child learning how to mend a torn sleeve while listening carefully to an elder's quiet story. Most of their names have disappeared. Their skills have not. Even today, echoes of their knowledge remain all around us. Gardeners still watch the seasons. Woodworkers still feel the grain of timber before making the first careful cut. Sailors still trust many of the knots perfected centuries ago. Bakers still know that dough cannot be hurried. Craftspeople still understand that patience often creates stronger work than speed. Parents still teach children by allowing them to watch before asking them to try. Communities still grow stronger when neighbors quietly help one another. Some forgotten skills have returned in recent years, not because people wish to live exactly as their ancestors did, but because they have rediscovered the quiet satisfaction hidden within making, repairing, growing, preserving, and caring. Across many parts of the world, people once again bake bread by hand. Others learn woodworking, weaving, pottery, gardening, or traditional cooking. Some simply spend more time walking through forests, noticing birds, clouds, and changing seasons with fresh attention. History rarely repeats itself exactly, nor should it. The modern world offers remarkable comforts, medical knowledge, communication, and opportunities that earlier generations could scarcely imagine. Life in the past was often physically demanding and uncertain. Many people faced hardships that we would never wish to return. Long winters, failed harvests, disease, dangerous travel, and exhausting labor shaped daily existence. Remembering forgotten skills does not require romanticizing every part of history. Instead, it invites us to appreciate the practical wisdom that ordinary people developed while facing those challenges. Perhaps that is one of history's greatest gifts. It reminds us that every generation has something to teach the next. Not because the past was perfect, but because human beings have always adapted with remarkable creativity, patience, and resilience. Imagine standing one final time upon a gentle hillside overlooking the village. The sun has climbed higher now, bathing fields, forests, rivers, and rooftops in warm golden light. Children's laughter drifts across the open meadow. A cart rolls slowly along the road toward a neighboring town. Smoke rises peacefully from kitchen chimneys. The world feels wonderfully alive. You pause for a quiet moment. Looking across the landscape, it becomes clear that history is not made only through dramatic moments. It is made every ordinary morning when someone chooses to repair rather than waste. Every afternoon when knowledge is shared instead of hidden. Every evening when families gather together, telling stories that preserve memories long after voices have fallen silent. These forgotten skills were never merely techniques. They were expressions of patience, responsibility, observation, kindness, humility, and respect for both people and the natural world. Although many have faded from everyday life, their quiet lessons remained surprisingly timeless. The stars that watched those distant generations still rise each evening. The seasons still change with gentle certainty. Seeds still become harvests. Children still learn by watching those they trust. Hands still grow steadier through practice. Communities still flourish through cooperation. Some truths travel through history without growing old. And so our long journey gently comes to its end. The quiet village continues its peaceful rhythm beneath the same endless sky that has sheltered humanity for thousands of years. The baker will rise again tomorrow before dawn. The shepherd will once again lead the flock into open fields. The gardener will notice another flower opening beneath the morning sun. The storyteller will gather another generation close to the warmth of the evening fire. Their names may never appear in history books. Yet their lives helped write history all the same. As you slowly leave this peaceful place behind, carrying with you the echoes of forgotten footsteps, familiar voices, and quiet wisdom, the morning breeze moves gently through the fields one last time. The village grows smaller in the distance. The winding path continues beyond the hills. And somewhere, just beyond the reach of memory, the ordinary people of the past continue their timeless work, patiently tending gardens, mending clothes, shaping wood, baking bread, caring for neighbors, and passing simple knowledge from one pair of hands to another. The story ends where every new day begins, with the quiet understanding that the greatest skills were often the ones everyone once knew, and almost no one thought to write down. The morning sun rises a little higher. The birds continue their gentle songs. The wind carries the scent of fresh earth across the fields. And history, as always, quietly walks on.